All right, buckle up because this story is not just about fame or Hollywood headlines. It's about what happens after the cameras leave, after a marriage ends, and after childhood is lived under the brightest spotlight on earth. Imagine growing up with the last name Jolie Pitt. Cameras flashing before you can even walk. Strangers arguing online about who your parents are, what they did, and whose side you're supposed to be on. Now fast forward to 2026. Angelina Jolie's kids are no longer just the children. They're young adults, artists, students, travelers, and survivors of a very public family collapse. And the reality of their lives after Brad Pitt is far more shocking, emotional, and complex than most people realize. When Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt split, the world treated it like entertainment. Team Angelina, Team Brad. Court documents turned into clickbait. But while adults argued, 6 kids were quietly growing up, reshaping their identities in the shadows of one of Hollywood's messiest divorces by 2026. That shadow still lingers. Let's start with the oldest, Maddox. Adopted from Cambodia, he was once the smiling little boy held on red carpets. But behind the scenes, Maddox grew into something very different from what Hollywood expected. By his early 20s, he had already distanced himself from the Pitt name completely. In private documents and university records, he reportedly used only Jolie. That alone sent a message louder than any interview ever could. Maddox became fiercely private. He studied abroad, traveled extensively, and focused on global issues rather than celebrity culture. Those close to the family have hinted that his relationship with Brad Pitt remains strained even years after the divorce. In 2026, Maddox isn't attending premieres or posting family photos. He's building a life that looks nothing like Hollywood. And that decision speaks volumes about what he experienced growing up. Then there's Pax, quiet, introspective, and often overlooked by the media. Pax had his own way of coping. As a teenager, he explored art, music, and photography as an escape. By 2026, Pax is deeply immersed in creative work behind the scenes. He's not chasing fame, and he's not interested in correcting rumors. People who've worked with him describe someone thoughtful, guarded, and deeply loyal to his mother and siblings. What's shocking isn't what Pax says. It's what he doesn't. No public praise of his father. No nostalgic childhood stories. Just silence. And in Hollywood, silence is often the loudest truth. Zahara's transformation, though, might surprise you the most. Once seen as Angelina's elegant red carpet companion, Zahara grew into a powerful young woman with a strong voice. By her 20s, she was already speaking publicly about identity, race, and social justice. In 2026, Zahara is confident, outspoken, and very aware of the platform her last name gives her. But here's the part most people don't expect. Zahara has reportedly been intentional about defining herself outside the Jolie Pitt narrative. She introduces herself without mentioning her famous parents. She chooses projects that reflect her values, not her lineage. And while she maintains a close bond with Angelina, her connection to Brad Pitt remains distant at best. Then come the twins, Knox and Vivian. Once the most photographed babies on the planet, now young adults navigating a world that has already decided who they are. Vivian, especially, has shown interest in theater and storytelling, occasionally working alongside her mother. But insiders say Angelina is careful, almost protective to a fault. When it comes to her youngest children, by 2026, Knox is described as deeply private, uninterested in Hollywood, and focused on academics. Vivian, on the other hand, flirts with creativity but resists full celebrity exposure. Neither appears publicly connected to Brad Pitt in any meaningful way. And that absence has fueled endless speculation. But the real shock isn't just that the kids are distant from their father. It's how deeply bonded they are to each other. Sources close to the family say siblings formed an unbreakable unit during the divorce. They leaned on one another in ways most kids never have to. Court battles, therapy sessions, media scrutiny. Every headline felt personal. And through it all, Angelina positioned herself not as a Hollywood icon, but as a fiercely protective mother. In 2026, that influence is unmistakable. The kids travel together. They celebrate milestones quietly. They avoid interviews. And when they do speak, it's carefully chosen, measured, and often emotional. Angelina Jolie's parenting style after Brad Pitt has been described as intense, nurturing, and sometimes controversial. She homeschooled them for years, exposed them to humanitarian work, and encouraged independence over conformity. Critics say she isolated them. Supporters say she saved them. The truth: it's probably both. And what about Brad Pitt? That's the part no one wants to say out loud by 2026. Brad Pitt's relationship with his children appears fractured, complicated, and painfully unresolved. Despite reports of attempts at reconciliation, the distance remains. Some of the kids are said to have limited contact, others none at all. And the emotional damage from those early years hasn't magically disappeared with time. What's shocking is how final it feels. Hollywood loves redemption arcs, but real life doesn't always follow a script. For Angelina Jolie's kids, life after Brad Pitt isn't about revenge or bitterness. It's about healing. It's about reclaiming their names, their stories, and their futures. They didn't ask to be born into fame. They didn't choose a public divorce. And they certainly didn't choose to become symbols in a cultural war between two celebrities. Yet, here they are. In 2026, standing at the edge of adulthood with scars the world barely acknowledges, some fans still hope for a big reunion, a family photo, a public forgiveness moment. But those close to the situation say that expectation might be more about what the public wants than what the children need. Because sometimes, the most shocking truth of all is this: walking away can be healthier than holding on. Angelina Jolie's kids are not broken. They're not lost. They're evolving. And their lives after Brad Pitt tell a story far deeper than gossip headlines ever could. A story about survival, identity, and growing up when the whole world is watching by 2026. The emotional aftershocks of Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt's separation still quietly ripple through the lives of their children. Not in loud, tabloid-friendly ways, but in subtle choices. The cities they choose to live in. The careers they avoid. The interviews they decline. Fame didn't just follow them into adulthood. It chased them. And they learned how to outrun it. What's especially striking is how differently each child processed the same family trauma. Maddox, for example, reportedly became the emotional anchor during the hardest years. As the oldest, he saw things earlier, understood more than he should have, and felt responsible in a way no teenager ever should. Friends of the family say Maddox grew up fast, not because he wanted to, but because someone had to be strong when everything else felt unstable. That kind of childhood doesn't just disappear. By 2026, Maddox is described as serious, focused, and emotionally mature beyond his age. He's not chasing validation. He doesn't need public approval. And that in itself is a quiet rebellion against the Hollywood machine that once defined him as Brad Pitt's son. Pax, on the other hand, internalized things differently. Those close to him say he struggled with anger during his teenage years. Not the explosive kind, but the silent, simmering type. Art became his outlet. Late nights sketching. Music blasting through headphones. Photography that captures shadows instead of smiles. By 2026, Pax's work reflects someone who has seen the darker side of fame and learned to translate pain into creativity rather than chaos. Zahara's journey carries a different kind of weight. Growing up as a black daughter in a white-dominated Hollywood. Family put her under a microscope long before she understood why. Add a highly publicized divorce and constant speculation about her parents, and the pressure doubled. But instead of shrinking, Zahara expanded. She leaned into education, activism, and leadership. In 2026, people around her describe a young woman who is articulate, emotionally intelligent, and deeply aware of who she is and who she refuses to be. What's rarely discussed is how much responsibility Zahara feels toward her younger siblings. She became a role model not just by age, but by emotional presence. In many ways, the Jolie children didn't just grow up together. They survived together. Knox and Vivian, being the youngest, experienced a different version of the story. They don't remember life before tension, before courtrooms, before whispered conversations behind closed doors. Their childhood memories are shaped by security guards, therapy appointments, and careful boundaries. And yet, by 2026, those boundaries may have saved them. Vivian's connection to storytelling isn't about chasing applause. It's about understanding people, understanding emotions, understanding what it means to tell a story without being consumed by it. Angelina's influence is obvious here. Not pushing, not forcing, but guiding. Letting her daughter explore creativity while protecting her from the brutal side of public opinion. Knox, meanwhile, has reportedly shown a strong interest in science and critical thinking. Numbers, logic, structure, things that make sense when emotions don't. People close to the family say Knox values anonymity more than any of his siblings. He's the one most likely to disappear completely from the public eye. And honestly, that might be his greatest strength. Now, let's talk about Angelina Jolie herself, because by 2026, her role in her children's lives has evolved in a way that surprises even her critics. She's no longer the mysterious Hollywood rebel or the headline-dominating superstar. She's something quieter now, more grounded. Friends describe her as deeply reflective, sometimes haunted, but unwavering when it comes to her kids. The divorce changed her, not just legally or emotionally, but fundamentally. Angelina has openly spoken about choosing motherhood over career opportunities. And in 2026, the evidence is everywhere. Her projects are selective. Her public appearances are rare. And when she does speak, it's often about healing, resilience, and giving children a voice in a world that rarely listens. Critics still argue that she influenced her children's perception of their father. Supporters argue she protected them. The truth likely sits in a complicated gray area that only the family truly understands. What's undeniable is this: the kids stand firmly beside her, and Brad Pitt. His absence is felt not because he's irrelevant, but because he's unresolved by 2026. Brad Pitt remains one of Hollywood's biggest stars, award-winning, respected, applauded. But personal success doesn't always translate into personal peace. The distance between him and his children has become one of the most uncomfortable truths behind his public image. Attempts at reconciliation have been rumored, denied, whispered about, and buried under legal language. What hurts the most, according to those familiar with the situation, isn't anger. It's disappointment. Missed birthdays. Awkward silences. The kind of emotional gaps that time alone doesn't heal. And that's what makes this story so shocking. Not scandal. Not drama. Not accusations, but reality. By 2026, Angelina Jolie's kids are not defined by who their parents were to each other. They're defined by who they became because of it. Strong, guarded, independent, emotionally complex. They've learned that love doesn't always look like togetherness. And family doesn't always fit into a perfect frame. There may never be a fairy tale ending. No grand reunion. No emotional interview that wraps everything up neatly. But maybe that's the point, because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about reconciliation. They're about survival, about choosing peace over performance, about growing up in the wreckage of fame and still finding your footing. And in 2026, that's exactly what Angelina Jolie's kids are doing quietly, bravely, and on their own terms. Disclaimer: the content in this video is based on publicly available information, media sources, and opinions. It is created for entertainment and educational purposes only. We do not claim or guarantee that every detail is 100% accurate.